Hi, friends. Before we get started today, I did want to give you a heads up if you hadn't heard. I'm hosting a workshop called Client Callout this Wednesday, July 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have been like racking your brain and trying to figure out like why social media isn't working for you, one of the diagnoses that I can probably pin is that you are not calling out your ideal client in your content, whether that's your hook or your caption or a combination. So that's the whole point of client call out. You know who your exact client is supposed to be, but you need practice and you need help like identifying what hooks are actually going to work and what content is going to work. So I'm going to walk you through that process of calling out your ideal client, and you're going to leave with some posts that you can go ahead and use that same week or maybe even save them for the week later. There are a couple of early bird tickets that are still left. I think we have maybe 10-ish that are still left at early bird pricing. If not, it goes up to regular pricing. So do not delay. The first link within the show description is going to help and get you over to Client Call Out. Can't wait to see you next week. Now let's get started. Hello, travel biz owner. Welcome to my corner of the travel industry, the Strategic Travel Entrepreneur Podcast. If you're ready to have fun, be inspired, get clarity, and take action in your travel business, then you're in the right place. Let's jump in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Strategic Travel Entrepreneur Podcast. If you're new around here, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast, because if you love this episode, there is going to be a whole host of juicy episodes coming your way, and also a really great backlog if you kind of want to binge a couple episodes that you haven't listened to before. We have a guest on the podcast, and I am super excited. I think this is the first time I've had somebody who's a doctor also on the podcast, so we can't forget this amazing education under your tool belt. Dr. Amanda White is not only a travel advisor, she is a trauma-informed doctor, or at least like that's what her coursework is under. So not saying that she's like a medical doctor, but she's got the education, the doctorate degree behind like workplace trauma. And not that we're necessarily touching on workplace trauma within this episode, but we're going to touch about, remember a couple episodes I had kind of mentioned overwhelm, and overwhelm's kind of a symptom to a root cause. So we're kind of gonna have like an adjacent conversation on that. And we're also going to be touching on like systems and how maybe you think systems is what you need, but you need some other like coping mechanisms to help out with that. So we're going to see where this episode kind of takes us, because I know it can take us in a couple of different places. So without further ado, hello, Amanda, to the Strategic Travel Entrepreneur. Oh, I didn't mention, Amanda is also a travel advisor. She has a travel agency, and I believe a couple of ICs already in the agency. Is that right, Amanda?
I'm adding some later this year.
Ooh.
So yeah, working on that right now, actually.
Okay. Awesome. Well, welcome, welcome. I'm so excited because at the beginning of this year, I know you had this brainchild to put together some resources for travel advisors, and it's finally come to life this summer. So I know we're going to talk about that. But just so everybody can get a bearing for who you are and what you do, what is this background with trauma, and how does it kind of like field into, or like what have you noticed like being a travel advisor, or some of the things that it kind of like sneaks up with like stress and boundaries within businesses?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so excited, a huge fan of the podcast. And th- so my background, originally I wanted to be a high school English teacher. That's what I was going to do. And somehow I fell in mental health because one day a friend said, you should be a therapist. And I was like,
Wow.
okay, cool. I could do that. I did not become a therapist, just so you know. Um, but I did go to school to be the English teacher. And then I ended up getting a job at a local mental health facility where I worked for almost 15 years.
Mm.
I had a team over 5 counties. And then I became very burnt out doing that. And I had a lot of workplace trauma that I experienced while I was there. And so one day I decided enough was enough and I put in my notice, and somebody had said, "Could you become licensed?" And I said, "Yes, I could." And I specifically chose a program where I could not become licensed, and instead focused on studying trauma.
Okay.
So I decided to get my doctorate, study trauma, specifically workplace trauma and abuse of management in the workforce.
Hmm.
Um, and I did research on that abusive management, spoke with 10 folks writing my dissertation, and just about what the stress in the workplace did to them.
Hmm.
And then during this time, I also decided to work for a health insurance company, and I had a team all over the state of West Virginia. I am from
Okay.
Ohio, and so that was fun while I did that. But 1 year ago, I decided I wanted to work full time as a travel advisor. I'd been one part time for a couple of years, and I decided I wanted to use my degree. And so I opened up a second business, ADW Catalyst Strategies, where I help businesses um, do trainings on maybe compassion fatigue, burnout, workplace trauma, help them understand that I contract with some local nonprofits doing trainings for parents and the community. I go into middle schools and teach them how to be resilient. And I wrote this course for travel advisors because on Facebook, the most common thing you see are travel advisors leaving the industry because they're burnout. They don't know how to deal with the stress that they're under, and they don't feel like they have time to deal with that stress.
Yeah.
And they are being fed a lot of information from a lot of people, and it's very hard to weed through. But the most common thing I see on Facebook is I'm becoming burnout. I don't know what to do. What can I do? And that was what prompted the Catalyst Reset, which is a course for travel advisors kind of going through a solution for that for them. And it's more evidence-based, research-based, which is very different than other courses I've seen in the industry.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think anybody really talks about like the whole mental wellness when it comes to being a business owner because there is a lot that you have to manage and you're no longer an employee. You
Mhm.
are in charge and you're also all of the employees within your business.
Yes.
'Cause like when you see something like a call out for help like that, like I'm drowning in my business, what are some of the first things that you think about that could actually be happening in those situations?
For the most part, I'm wondering how many hours the person is working.
Okay.
Uh, so I immediately think of, are you on 24/7 even when you don't have people traveling?
Ooh.
So what kind of boundaries have you set between the work-life balance?
Hmm.
And I also think about what do you have going on in your family life? Do you have a lot of stuff happening in your family life that's really hard to work through and you're trying to push through as a business owner as well? Because that can be really difficult if you don't have the right tools in place to help you work through that. And we feel this pressure that we have to continue with being, taking on more and more clients when we really, in reality, maybe need to take a pause and focus on some other stuff happening in our lives instead.
Yeah,
And that's a hard decision to make as a business owner. When do we pause, right? And what kind of
very
structure do
much.
we have? Yeah.
Yeah, I think about my own self. I accidentally worked all of the 4th of July weekend. Wasn't planning on it, but I got into like I guess a gung-ho mood. And so this past weekend, I was like, you can't do that again. There is some work that I wanted to get done, but I was like, okay, we're gonna have to like taper this off so that I can't like cut it off cold turkey, like not to be working. But like that's kind of what my weekends were like, where I wasn't doing any work and I was just like fully recharging and like knowing and be aware, like you are a crazy person who can't, because I feel like that is also the mentality of working 24/7 or 25/8 as some people like to say is
Yeah.
very much like a badge of honor. And anytime I hear somebody say like, "Oh my gosh, I just worked 16 hours today," I'm like, "Ooh, that does not sound lovely in any way, shape, or form." I feel like that is again, like more in the old school mentality of doing business. And a lot of us, and I feel like it's also like a different generation coming in here and prioritizing that mental health and putting ourselves first. That yes, income is very important. We need it to survive, we need it to pay everything, and then we need it to do amazing things in the world as well. But if we are not okay, we can't keep going to the job or keep performing at the business. So we have to put ourselves first, or your body's gonna say, hey, shut down. We're gonna do this for you since you didn't do it for us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. When I was doing my research for my dissertation, the biggest thing that was the most common with folks, besides what they had experienced, was the effects of what they had experienced, the stress that they were under. I
Mhm.
had somebody I met with that had recurring MRSA because of the stress that they were under.
Wow.
I had folks that had heart issues. I
Mhm.
had developed AFib and I had it twice. And there was no other known cause except for stress that I had been under. I had people losing hair,
Mhm.
people just all kinds of issues happening because of the stress that they were under and they hadn't dealt with.
Mhm.
Because what happens, and this is something I go through in the course, our body remembers stress that we're under. And even though we may not have something affect us immediately, eventually it's going to catch up to us, like you were talking about. And our body is going to start shutting down. It's going to start having things happen. Our immune system's going to become blown because we're not dealing with those things. And that's something that we have to be aware of as business owners, especially if we have folks under us. We want to make sure that we're modeling that behavior as well, which is very, very important. That's something I had to look at as a leader, and I forced my team to take not ICs. I'm not talking about ICs, but
Mhm.
I did force my team when I had a team um, in my other jobs to make sure they were taking their PTO, making sure that they weren't
Yeah,
working 16-hour days and doing those things because that's very detrimental to our bodies.
right. You mentioned, and I hope I get this right, that anxiety or stress and anxiety is kind of like a form of a trauma
Mhm.
response.
Yeah.
Can we get into that a little bit?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't realize that stress can be a form of trauma. So when we think about trauma, we're immediately thinking, oh, somebody was assaulted, or we've witnessed a crime, or we think about things that we've gone through. Um, I have grown up through a lot of traumatic events that have happened in the world through
Mhm.
my whole lifetime,
Right.
9/11,
Same.
um, the Oklahoma City bombing, like a lot of stuff that has happened, but that's what we think of when we think of trauma. But trauma is actually something that happens that has this negative effect on us, right?
Mhm.
Um, so it's something that maybe affects us continuously, and stress can be part of that. Um, and so when we have workplace stress, which is a form of workplace trauma, that is something that would affect us negatively, something that's going to continue to impact things that we're doing, whether it's our relationship, how we work with clients, how our body is functioning, how we do. Many travel advisors have another job, so how you're functioning in your other job
Mhm.
because you're so stressed with your travel agency, or even vice versa. Or maybe you have health issues. That's a kind of stress, and stress is strain, and that can be a version of trauma.
Okay. And
Yeah.
is this like this anxiety pattern? Would you say this is something that people have developed over time with life experiences, or is this something like even genetics that people might be born with?
Mhm. I think it can be both for sure,
Okay.
because when we're looking at, so it goes back to that like nature versus nurture concept, right?
Mhm.
Um, I am innately an anxious person. My sister is not. So I can become very anxious about a lot of things, but she is more in control and will take, command. Now I can fake it and you won't know that I'm anxious. Nobody knows when I'm anxious except
Mhm.
for maybe one or two people. But I think it's a combination of genetics can happen because personalities are affected by our genetics, and how we are born. There are studies that show that, and of course,
Mhm.
how we're raised.
Yeah.
So I come from a generation, I'm class of 2000, so that's going to tell you about my age, right? So in my class, we had a lot of pressure in the class of 2000 to do things.
Hmm.
And I still remember the first day of my freshman year, the junior English teacher walking through the door and saying, "You guys are the cream of the crop. I don't even like freshmen, but I will talk to you because you guys are expected to succeed and you guys are going to do great things." Well, the 10 of us who were in that class, that was pressure that has affected us even to like this day. And so that's something that we were like raised with, right? So it's a combination of both. And that's
Okay.
always made me an anxious person. Don't want to fail, cream of the crop, so um that's definitely personality wise. And you can see that with siblings for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, because that I was raised to have like very high standards like growing up. Like it was A's and it needed to be A's pluses. And if it was not that, I was essentially a failure. So I remember like the one C I ever got, which coincidentally was on world history. And I think I was like a sophomore in high school. And I only got a C in like one semester. I was like, I'm gonna die. Like
Yeah.
I can't bring like I don't even know how I'm supposed to bring this back home. Uh and like I did, and obviously I'm here today. But it is funny like external pressures because then like listening to that parent was a worse student than I was, and I was like, what are you
Yeah.
putting on me?
Yeah. And so one of the things that I've learned over the course of the last year, especially because I am credentialed to do trainings for parents on how to talk to their teens and how dads can be more present.
Mhm.
And one of the biggest things that those trainings talk about are our meta emotional philosophy. And what that means is basically how we were raised
Mhm.
impacts how we are with others, or maybe even if we're a parent, how we might interact with our kids based on emotions. So, how did our parents handle anxiety? I had a very anxious mom. How did our parents handle anger or sadness? And that impacts us and
Yeah.
that impacts our emotional intelligence, which is something that you hear a lot more, especially with TikTok. What do we know about emotions? Can we name them? How are we feeling? How are they impacting us? So that, and stress can be an emotion. It's going with anxiety, it's going with sadness and depression, and all of that.
Yeah, because I know some responses to this, like if we're giving some like straight examples for advisors, it can be like you say that you're overwhelmed, but maybe overwhelm is that you've become snappy with your partner, snappy with your kids.
Yep.
The phone has rung, and then you're like, ooh, like you get a visceral reaction, like you
Yeah.
shudder at the phone call, or you shudder at like getting new clients just because you're overwhelmed. What do you feel like from some of the research that you've done? What's like actually happening? What's going on when these kind of like visceral reactions appear?
So you are associating that with something negative. And I'll give you a personal example. I do not keep my phone on. I don't like to hear it ring because
Same.
when I left that organization in 2020, so it's been 6 years. I want to explain that. It's been 6 years and I still don't like my phone to ring. My phone was ringing off the hook and it caused a lot of trauma. I would literally cry when my phone rang because it meant that I was on call and it meant I had to leave my house and go deal with somebody, not go deal, but go help somebody in a crisis. I
Hmm.
wasn't sleeping. I hadn't slept for 2 weeks one time. I literally spent it in an emergency room with folks in a crisis because we had a local hospital shut down. And so it triggered all of this stuff. So every time my phone would ring, I would immediately associate it with that trauma that I had experienced right before I left that organization. So it has a negative effect on me every time I would hear my phone ring. That's why it's always on silent. It's
Yeah.
not because I don't like talking on the phone either, but that's because of the generation I grew up in.
Hmm.
We were nervous to call people because they didn't have caller ID back then, and you might have to talk to the
Yes.
parent, right?
Yeah.
Um, But it's because usually it's going to be because there's something negative that you associate with that, and so it immediately makes you anxious. You have new clients, well, you have five people traveling at once, like, and you just don't know what to do because maybe you haven't learned to cope with that, or you don't have any systems in place to ensure that you can deal with that workflow, and you've just taken off more than you can chew at that time.
That it's funny because when I started going full time as a business owner 5 years ago, that's the first thing that I did. And I don't feel like for me there was any sort of anxiety in silencing my phone. It was more like I need to focus and I have to
Hmm.
concentrate, and you are distracting me.
Yep.
So I'm going
Right.
to silence
Right.
all the phone and all the different notifications because I need to be focused. And I will take a look at it when I deem I have a moment, like a free time to take a look and like see what's going on that side of things. But for the most part, I'm like that ringer is not on unless like during the work I feel like maybe move if we were moving
Mhm.
and I wasn't gonna be looking at my phone. But like during the workday, no, I never have. Like there's no ringer on there because I'm also like periodically looking to see like who's calling me.
Right.
I know that that is also, I feel, a point of contention when it comes to travel advisors. Like the first system, I guess, if you were going to put one in place, is a system for boundaries
Hmm.
because you can't be all things to everybody
Right.
all the time. Like I've heard of parents who work from home and have their kids at home have to even put boundaries on their children to be like, look, if I'm on this call, give me this, and then I will give you my full attention. So where do you think are like some places advisors might be able to put boundaries, whether that's like against loved one or not against, but like you want like when you're with your loved ones, you want to have your full attention for those things, but you also want to have your full attention doing your work. So how do you kind of like balance that?
So, when I first started being a travel advisor, I was still in my doctorate program
Hmm.
and I was also working full time. And I had a stepdaughter in
Oh
softball. It
boy.
was her senior year. So I had a lot going on, right?
Yeah.
And so boundaries were something I had to learn very quickly,
Okay.
to ensure that I could do all of these things. So I think, like when I was at her softball games, I did not work. I was 100% focused on her
Yeah.
and her alone. Those were important. It was her senior year. I was making sure I could see her catch the ball or hit the home run or do whatever she was doing with the game, right?
Yeah.
I put in rules that by 8 p.m. every night I was done, and then it was family time, and that was the rule with school, with travel, no matter what. And then, if somebody's traveling, obviously that's a different thing where they can reach me. Um,
Hmm.
but I think the biggest thing that you have to do is you have to decide what those boundaries are, and you have to consistently use them and you have to be firm about them. You can't
Yeah.
say, oh, because you're my friend and I booked your trip, you can go ahead and text me outside of my business hours, even though you're not traveling. You have to be adamant about them, but you also have to tell people what they are. So from the moment they contact you and inquire about a trip, send them a how I work guide that goes over how you communicate with your
Mm.
clients, what your business hours are. Make sure they're on your Facebook, on your Instagram, your website, like however you're communicating, make sure you have those business hours and be firm about them. And don't be like, well, I've booked this client like 20 times, so I'm going to be more lenient. No, just be firm with everybody
Hmm.
because then they may tell somebody they refer to you that you're available 24/7 when that's not how you want to run your business. So
Right.
you are the business owner, decide how you want to run it, but you have to be firm and consistent in those boundaries for sure.
Yeah, I think where this helps is like seeing other people who stand firm in their
Mhm.
boundaries. And is there a time and place to bend? I feel like, of course,
Yeah,
like you don't have to like stand firm if there's like, especially an emergency
right.
that's happening, or you need to be flexible. Like maybe you took Friday off, so you're gonna work
Hmm.
Saturday. And kind of like putting it, giving like yourself grace to be flexible in that too. But it is so important. I think this like helps a lot like with my own boundaries, especially with people that I work with. when they're like, I'm not going to be available, when they're firm, I'm like, well, shoot, if they're doing that, then I also need to keep
Mhm.
practicing that. So I think like the more examples that we have in that saying, like, I am firm that this is the way that it's going to be, this is not the way that it's going to be, and then also outlining that those expectations. Because I'll never forget the first time that I had mentioned to somebody about charging fees, and I can either plan the whole thing out or we can just do a one-time consultation for my consultation fee. And they decided not to work with me. And I was like, you just saved me so much time. Like, I don't have to be going down this like black hole figuring out that at some point all my efforts were going to be futile. You just
Right.
at the right beginning just told me without telling me per se.
Yeah. And well, I think you bring up a valid point with that too, is, when you decide how you're running your business, one of those boundaries are how many times are you willing to change an itinerary before you maybe charge
Mm,
another fee?
mm-hmm.
Or how much time are you spending on that proposal? Are you tracking your time so
Yes.
that you know that you didn't lose money on it? I had a friend who recently said, like, after all the time that I've spent on this, I've lost money,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think and I've lost money on trips as well.
Yeah.
But I think having those in place and knowing what your bending might be, it
Yeah.
is important. Um, Bending is going to be like for those clients who maybe I live on the East Coast. So if I have a West Coast client, I'm going to have to maybe stretch my boundary a little bit, like timing wise, to
Hmm.
be able to fit their time zone.
Yeah.
I've done that before, because obviously if they're getting off work at 8 p.m. my time, well, I tend not to work past 8 p.m. I'm probably going to stretch that if they can't meet on a Saturday because I want to be able to meet with them and they're 3 hours behind me, right?
Right.
So I think that's a valid point where sometimes, but don't do that consistently either
Right.
because otherwise those boundaries are just going to go to the wayside.
Right. Yeah, 'cause I'll like earlier this summer there were a couple consults and people had asked me if I had weekend availability, and I don't normally, but I opened up some dates and then I just modified the schedule that week. So you are able you are able to bend the plan to whatever might work for the timing that you're needing as well as your clients. And that thing about losing money, I'll never forget. And she might be listening to this episode too, an advisor that I was talking to who figured out that she was probably making like less than $25 an hour. And I know what her career was before going into the industry. And I was like, so would you work for $25 an hour in that career? She's like, I would never work for that amount of money. And I'm like, well, there you go. Like, there's a signal that we need to do something a little bit different because there's so many levers that can also be pulled because it's not necessarily increased fees, but maybe it's increased spend by the
Mhm.
client. Maybe it's you're upselling more. So here's like what the base trip is, but you're always upselling a photo package or travel insurance or whatever. So I think like that also has to be looked at because I know I like to talk about, and many others also like to talk about working less but earning more, like really maximizing on your time because you do not need to be trading time for dollars, especially as a business owner,
Right.
especially where you don't have things like sick pay, holiday pay, vacation pay. Like you have to account for all of that.
Mhm.
So, and that all has to be buffered not only in the commissions that you're making, but also the fees that you're charging. This is also part of like a boundary in
Right.
how much what are you going to sell? Because I've also talked to advisors who are like, I will not do FIT because that's going to take me like 10 times as many hours as like booking a cruise that I can do with like my hands backwards and and my eyes closed. So you have to like find the different levers that you can pull because if booking 100 mass market balcony ships is going to get you to also what your goals are and also give you the flexibility that you're looking for versus somebody might just want to book a really great river cruise group and that's going to get them to their goals, again, like it's a little bit like being flexible and what is it that you really need and going back to your goals and kind of like honoring them. And then like I put my marketing hat on and going leaning all in, drawing that line in the sand and being comfortable. And that's the only thing that you talk about. So you're not talking about 50. That's a boundary in itself there. It's like, what are you talking about on your social media and
Yeah.
your marketing when you're networking with people? Because if you're talking about like 10 different types of trips or 10 different type of people, like nobody knows what to hire you for. Oh boy. I'm like, that's a whole other that's a whole other um rabbit hole to go into. I know we were kind of talking too also about like where stress kind of bleeds into the different avenues of our life, like where it can start affecting our health and start affecting relationships. So when you feel like people are feeling like maybe they're a little bit heightened, are there any sort of tips to kind of like de-escalate where the stress might be heading towards?
Yeah. So, I feel like this has been talked about a lot more, especially with the introduction of TikTok and, a lot more reels and things. But one of the things that I think is a tremendous help are forms of mindfulness. And so I'm not talking about yoga. I'm not talking about, I mean, yoga can be a form of that, but that's not what I mean. I don't mean like I don't mean self-care in a form of taking a bubble bath. That's great too, but what are these other forms? And so these are going to be breathing techniques, or these are going to be body scans. And I actually walk folks through in the course a body scan. I do the body scan with them and how they can do it.
Oh, that's cool.
And then mindfulness toolboxes. And so everybody who participates in the course will get access to a list for a mindfulness toolbox, which myself and the National Alliance on Mental Illness partnered with one of the travel suppliers that I book with to do that for folks locally who had been survivors of the big flood right before Texas. West Virginia
Mhm.
was affected, and 9 people had lost their lives. Um, and so this toolbox helps you just know like ways that you can cope with your five senses. So when you have smells, what's maybe a smell that helps you calm down? For a lot of people, it might be lavender or vanilla. Maybe some people it's a citrus smell that it just makes them feel better, right?
Yeah.
What's a sound that you like to hear? Um, I am a Swiftie, so I love to hear Taylor Swift.
Mhm.
That will calm me down, right? Um, what is maybe something that you like to see? Could it be that you like to just watch YouTube videos on dogs or
Mhm.
something? What are things around you that help calm you down? Maybe it's a picture of you on a trip with people that you can just reminisce about, and that can help you. What's a feeling that something that you like to touch, whether it's like, I don't know, back in the day, corduroy pants were big, right? And I just
Mhm.
loved to touch my corduroy pants, like
Feels so
rub my hands
good.
on them. So
Yeah.
that might be like a feeling that you like to do. Or they sell worry stones, which are amazing.
Mhm.
You can get those on Amazon. And then for taste, maybe just something that you like to taste. Maybe for me right now, it's watermelon with salt on it. That helps, that puts me in a good
Ooh.
mood. Or I treat myself to ice cream every single day.
Yes.
And
Ah,
so that is my like afternoon. Sometimes it's my morning treat, depending on the day, but
yeah.
I'll get an Oreo bar every day or some form of ice cream. Is
Nice.
that good for me? Yes,
Yeah.
because why? Everything in moderation, but that's a taste that helps me while I'm going through things. So it's really just about using our senses and being mindful of what we're doing, being mindful of how we eat, maybe not eating in front of the TV, um, getting outside and getting some vitamin D, not sitting at our desk all day. Get a standing desk. I have a standing desk, so I stand.
Yeah.
Um, and doing those things can be so helpful because we're de-stressing. We have to walk away from the work.
Mhm.
That's the biggest thing, is walking away from that work for a while, and turning it off. So I have, even if it's just an afternoon, and I tell people this all the time, I take time away from social media. I take time away from my phone.
Yeah.
I leave it in another room,
Yeah.
I turn the time limits on my phone because I have an iPhone, those kind of things can help with those stress levels because right now there's a lot of negativity on social media, right?
Hmm.
And so when you're being fed all of that all the time, that's increasing your stress levels, even if you don't know that
Right.
that it's doing it. So
Right.
you got to take time away. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Rita actually taught me something really good, which was when you're looking at your year, and this was in one of her classes, like as you're planning your year, look at when you're going to be away and
Yeah.
be adamant that you are taking those days and don't schedule clients while traveling while you are trying to take an actual vacation so
Hmm.
that you have real time off. And I have stuck by that. I had a whole week where I was at Disney with my niece and nephew. I did not work. I
Yeah.
didn't post about it. Nothing except for like a picture maybe that I was eating beignets or something, but that was about it.
Yeah.
Um, and so those kind of things are very important. Those are boundaries you can set ahead of time as
Yeah.
you are working through it. Yeah.
I love those tips. And because that also starts me thinking that last one where we're talking about like your own calendar and like turning away business, but not even like refer them out to people.
Mhm.
Like I feel like this is again a very old school thing. It's like, no, the business is mine. I'm gonna keep
Yeah.
doing it. I'll just like work through the vacation. And I'm like, this is like we need to have this like I forget like I don't know if it's like a campaign of
Mhm.
sorts where like make referring out to other travel businesses the thing that we do because like doctors do that all the time, lawyers will do that all the
Yep.
time. Like I remember my car accident lawyer, there was an employer issue that I was having and I was just curious like if she could help me out and she
Mhm.
firmly said like that is not my area of
Yep.
specialties, but I know this attorney that can help with that. And we that should be a very prominent thing that happens in the travel industry. That's also a boundary that you don't need to know everything. You don't need to
Right.
know every cruise line per se. You don't need to know every DMC in South Africa. You don't need to know all the things. Like if you know that somebody does really great with Japan, refer that business out. Because I feel like that also helps you hone in on your strengths. And I've had a couple people talk about strengths over the years, strengths building, and focusing on working on those and not necessarily where your weaknesses might lie, because it's going to take a lot of time if you've never booked a trip to Dubai or
Mhm.
Qatar, for you to figure that out unless you want that to become a specialty
Right.
of yours. So that is another boundary. I know we could keep like talking and we're probably going to have like a version two at some point, but I want to let people know if they are needing some sort of resource like the Catalyst
Mhm.
Reset, like what is it all about and where can they go? And I know that we do have a special promo code, which I don't know off the top of my head, but I will make sure to include it
Yes.
in the link so people have it.
Yeah. So, overall, the Catalyst Reset is for travel advisors to kind of learn more about stress, what burnout is, the difference between all of those. And everything is specific to the travel industry. So, how's that going to impact you, as a travel advisor, or what can you do? So, those boundaries, being able to advocate for yourself and your clients, and there are actual, email prompts that I've included in the course to help with the advocacy part, as well.
Mm.
There is information about self-care and the mindfulness. There's tons of resources in there. And I was telling Rita, as we were talking, I consider this a living document. So things are going to be updated as the industry changes. Um, and the resource section is going to be updated, at least once a month. I'm going to be putting new resources in there. I
Mhm.
work very closely with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and there's a lot of stuff, there. And of course, whatever like ASTA throws out, or the Travel Institute, or other resources. There's, some of my favorite things like podcasts, and websites and articles you can read. But there's also a special section for agency owners and how they can help even their ICs and or W-2 employees,
Okay.
with this. So they get their own module just specific to that and implementing it. And as everybody is going through, they're developing an action plan. So what am I going to take from this course? Because you do a course, then you never do anything with it, right?
Yeah.
So there's a specific action plan. And then I do offer the ability to folks to meet with me. If they want assistance with that action plan, that can be an add-on that they get. But
Okay.
Rita does have the link for the course, and like she said, there's a promo code. I think it's 15% off for the listeners of this specific podcast to
Nice.
get on the course or off the course. And right now it's I think it's very inexpensive for a travel advisor course, and I don't plan to raise the price until maybe 2027 if I raise it at all, because I want to make sure it's affordable for folks. It's less than $150.
Nice.
And I really think that it's something that's different than other courses I've taken in the industry
Right.
because it does address science, it addresses research, and it addresses my experience in because I actually do personal research in this. So it takes all of that together and gives you some really good information and tips that you can use.
Yeah, no, I feel like this is like a very foundational uh
Yes.
piece of like professional but also like personal development that everybody should have, regardless of where you're at in the business, because I know like this is a place like we're all gonna feel stressed at some point in the business, and like this 6 months might have been like a really great coasting 6 months, but the next 6 months, oopsie, something happened and something pops up. So especially like those mechanisms that you had
Right.
mentioned to like how do you cope and like how do you keep going and how do you put on like further boundaries or
Right.
whatever is needed, I think is very much needed within the industry. So very much thank you for putting something like this, like seeing it through your unique lens and putting it together for travel advisors.
Yeah. Thank you. And also folks can go to the my business that I do with workplace trauma and whatnot is ADW Catalyst Strategies, and that's literally the website too. So it's that.com, which I know Rita has as well. And I'm just excited because each module, which I didn't mention, also has there's a whole workbook with the course.
Hmm.
So each module has some prompts to help you start thinking for you to work through, which gets you to that action plan to do. And there's an action plan for agency owners as well. So they would have
Nice.
two to do. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks so much for being here, Amanda,
Thank you
and
for having me.
sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, travel advisors. We will see you here next week again, and make sure to check out all the links in the show descriptions. See you soon. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today. Remember to check out the show notes for all relevant links and resources from today's show. See you next time.